My name is Elena Lamprecht. I'm an independent researcher in psychosis and neurodiversity. Happy Science Day. This is for the Neurodiversity Foundation, and I just wanted to say a quick thank you to them for this amazing opportunity and all their support and all their mentorship throughout the program. I really appreciate it a lot. My presentation is on what drives hallucinations in neurodiverse populations. This is a sensory and genetic approach, more sensory than genetic, but it's all in there. And I also wanted to say that this is pre-recorded. I am live at the end for question and answers, and to please stay on. My research partners right after me, Frederique. So yes, enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you live then. Thanks. I want to start off with a story of how all of this started. And it started with a podcast, All in the Mind. And I heard these two very specific experiences from other women about their experiences with postpartum psychosis. And the first is, I remember my senses were heightened. Everything was really bright, and the crying was intensified. Everything was closing in on me. And on a coffee date with a friend, Gabriel began hallucinating. The flowers began wilting. The furniture was rotting around her, and everything was death and decay, and everything was gray. I have you now my room in New York. It is 2020, and we all know that this is the year of COVID. My daughter was 3 days old, but I had not slept for 7 days total. I was very anxious. My mother knew how much I needed sleep, so she took my daughter from me into the other room, and I was here in bed. All of a sudden, the room turned red, and I felt this heavy presence. Time was warped. And what I saw in the room, standing at the left-hand corner of that bed, was terrifying. Yet it was familiar. I had seen this thing before. And it was this awareness of what had really happened after listening to the podcast and connecting the dots that led me to become an independent researcher in hallucinations. Around the same time that I heard this podcast is when I received my diagnosis for autism, ADHD, and also complex PTSD. So obviously during this time, there was a lot of self-discovery, self-exploration, lots of questions about my life in general, functioning, all of that, the big package that comes through getting officially diagnosed. Part of that was research on what I had experienced, and I found what I call research gold. It was this paper, Recognizing Psychosis and Autism Spectrum Disorder. And in it, it said that up to 34.8% of people who are diagnosed autistic also have a comorbidity with psychosis. And this absolutely floored me. In the general population, about 3% of people are diagnosed with psychosis. I'm going to get into definitions soon. 12.5 within the general population have psychosis-like experiences. I'm also going to get into that. And again, autistic population is 34.8. That is a pretty significant jump. That's almost 6 times as high. Now for a little housekeeping with definitions. So psychosis, hallucinations, I go back and forth with them a lot. What exactly do they mean? So let's look at hallucinations, which is the topic of this presentation. And it is defined as a sensory perception in the absence of corresponding external stimulus. So it means that your body and your sensory systems is perceiving that something is there, and it feels very real because your sensory system is picking that up, but in quote reality, it's not there. And that's where it kind of gets a little bit muddled with delusions, because it's, well, you believe there's something there, but it's not, so therefore it's delusional, but then yet your sensory system is picking this up and you're feeling it. So where is the line drawn? And in 1969, John Strauss, he came up with this terminology, psychosis-like experiences, which is basically stating that this is actually something that's very common as a human experience, and that it really doesn't need these very hard definition boundaries. And in order to study hallucinations and understand delusions, that we kind of have to think of it in that context as a continuum. Now, types of hallucinations. So, as I mentioned before about hallucinations being part of the sensory experience, and just as a sensory experience, they are experienced through different sensory modalities. One of the most common is auditory hallucinations, and a great example of this, especially as a psychosis like experience, is hearing your name when no one's there. That is by far the most common. Others include visual, and this is a great place to talk about imaginary and hallucinations. So if when you're using your imagination, you have full control over that, of what you see, of what you perceive, but hallucinations you don't. And sometimes, of course, this can be frightening. Sometimes it can be one unwanted and definitely unexpected. Tactile is, possibly the feeling of being touched. Olfactory, it's, smelling something that's not there. The most interesting that I find is called felt presence. And it's interesting because there's actually no sensory confirmation. And it's the feeling that something is there. And I love how I said it's the feeling that something is there, yet you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. And there is research in this that actually has to do more with your proprioception, which is where your body is in space. And this alone is an entire presentation. But if you would like to learn a little bit more, there's an excellent book called Presence, The Strange Science of the Unseen Other, and I highly recommend it. So this got me thinking about the neurodivergent sensory experience. So I know for a fact with myself that I have differentiated sensory experiences compared to X normal person, right? I am hypersensitive to light. I am hypersensitive to certain smells and like for example, I cannot stand touching dry towels. Bleh, I just bleh. All I have to say is that. Um, so obviously we know this is our sensory system, and there is a lot of research. And also, I was a special educator and early interventionist for a long time before I went into research, and now I work at a university. But this is what I worked on a lot with kids, is understanding their sensory differences, how they're functioning in the classroom. Is it noise that they can actually hear at a higher level that's too sensitive for them? And this is when I started to brainstorm around a hypothesis around autistic individuals, neurodivergent individuals, and hallucinations. Now that I just covered sensory processing differences, so actually in hallucinations, there are multiple pathways that overlap that use sensory processing. I'm going to get into more examples on slides ahead, but just wanted to touch up upon trauma. So there's actually a lot of research around trauma and hallucinations during sleep and during sleep stages, REM sleep, and also we know that the neurodivergent population actually has higher rates of stress and trauma compared to the general population. And I also wanted to touch up upon neurological and medical. So this can include, for example, brain injuries. And there is also research and also around Parkinson's that also cause hallucinations. There are many different ways even for not just neurodivergent, but general population, a human being to have these experiences. Now for genetics, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I actually wasn't able to collect data on genetics. I'll explain that further on. But what I wanted to highlight here are the genetic correlations between, for example, ADHD, schizophrenia, ASD, and bipolar disorder. And you can see that there are correlations. So exactly what does this mean? So a genetic correlation, it measures the degree to which traits, so for example, let's say the ability to hallucinate, that they are influenced by the same genes. It doesn't mean, for example, that ADHD and ASD are almost 50% genetically identical. That's not what this is saying. What this is saying is almost that they have the same switches. Whether or not those switches are turned on or not are dependent on other variables. But you can see that there is this big correlation. It's almost like they exist within a family. And the interesting thing here too is that schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are actually very much alike. And there's a big debate about the DSM-5, how they're separate but they're more alike biologically than what you can see within the DSM-5. And also, I just want to make just a statement about bipolar disorder and also schizophrenia, and that they definitely belong within the neurodiversity movement as much as autism, as much as ADHD, as much as complex PTSD. They're, as you can see, that it's like a family, and definitely we share lots of traits. And this is just, one big point that I would really like to make out, especially on today for Science Day for the Neurodiversity Foundation. Now I'm going to talk about a practice known as sitting out, utiseta. So this is an Old Norse tradition, although it's still being practiced today. There are plenty of Reddit forums that you can go and read and to be able to see what's happening today. But this is originally from the Viking era, and the practice was mostly to sit on a burial mound, isolated, and to be able to receive visions of your loved ones, of your ancestors. And so now I want to take this into the context of modern day science, where practices like this could now, what we would say, invoke hallucinations. There's also really interesting research about excavation sites from burial mounds, that there's a plant called henbane that is native to Europe. And if you chew on the seeds, it actually has a hallucinatory effect. So this plant was actually found in burial mounds, and also it's known that during the time, shamans, spiritual leaders also use this as well. And the reason also why I bring this up is that there is so much out there in terms of cultural context. And if we now take it to the sensory pathway context, I'm going to put myself in this person's shoes right here. I'm sitting on a burial mound. I am looking out into the dark. Let's say that I've chewed on these seeds and I am thinking about my ancestors, and there's probably other burial mounds around me. So I'm also probably thinking about death, how they died, things like this. And I believe that under all of those conditions, now that I'm very aware of my own hallucinatory experiences, I know that I would see something. So this is also a great example about the human experience of hallucinations and the deep history that we have as human beings with them. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up, is to be able to now make all those ties together culturally that I find fascinating. So now let's do a set out together. Now imagine that we are here in the forest, all alone at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we have a flashlight. So what's exactly happening right now? Well, we do know that there is sensory deprivation when it comes to light. We can't see what's beyond those trees. We can't see what's behind us. So there's a theory called predictive coding theory, where our brain is constantly generating predictions without sensory input. And then we have the sensory input, and then it tries to match what's happening. So with this type of predictive coding, what we can't see, our brain is trying to come up with possibilities and images in order to protect us. And this is a theory of why we might hallucinate or see something that's not there. Now let's put sleep deprivation in the mix. The person you see blindfolded here, his name is Randy Gardner. This is 1963. He decided with his friends to join a science fair project to see who could stay awake the longest. They tossed a coin. Randy was it. They wanted to beat the record at the time, which was actually held by a DJ in Hawaii, which I thought was hilarious. And just the whole planning of this, it's fascinating. But basically, he stayed awake for 11 days. He was supervised by a professor at Stanford University because his parents were very concerned. And it is noted that he did start to hallucinate around day 4 to day 6. What's very interesting to note is that his sensitivity to odor, sounds, and colors became more acute. So I know that this is a case study, but it shows here that his sensory differences actually and processing differences change with sleep deprivation alone. So this is definitely adding to that mix of multiple sensory pathways whenever it comes to hallucinations. Now, with all this background research that I had done, I still had the question of Why is the rate so much higher in autistic populations when it comes to hallucinations? And what role does sensory processing play? And that's when I came up with a hypothesis that sensory processing differences that are hidden in autistic populations serve as one pathway to psychosis spectrum experiences. So this is when I started to brainstorm about exactly what my research project was going to look like. And I call this methodology prep. This by far took the longest time out of 8 months of working on this project. First, I thought about doing surveys, but then very quickly learned that I couldn't. And this is because of ethics. And ethics of doing research in psychosis, there's a lot of red tape around it. I started looking at bioinformatics, which is a very interesting field, and it's using computer science to be able to analyze large databases with genetic information, looking at assessments. So I spent the most time on this, and I want to say that I'm very happy that I was able to get into the UK Biobank with help from the Neurodiversity Foundation. Yay! So thank you guys so much. But once I was in there were all these paywalls, and realizing, you know what, this is really what a grant is supposed to be used for. And so I had to shelf this project. So instead, I did a meta-analysis. And now for the meta-analysis that I did. So I first looked at assessments that capture both sensory and psychosis-like experiences as a comparison. And then I did a literature search, both through academic databases and also by using AI. So I definitely verified those sources to make sure that AI actually wasn't hallucinating itself, although AI does not have a biological sensory system. Anyway, then I took the effect sizes and I extracted them. I know that it's really small, but I just wanted to give like a little screenshot. The big file you can see, and then the little one on the bottom, that's after the audit that I went through of how much information, how much data I actually couldn't use. And it was over 1,000 participants, but I'm really happy that I was able to go through and be really meticulous about it. And it's just, and I just wanted to mention that this process is so important to be able to go through. Okay, now for the extraction of data. So I'm just going to have this whole slide here. So I use JASP, which is a free and open source statistical analysis software. It's from the University of Amsterdam. I highly recommend using it, most of all because it's free and it works great. So I ran my analysis, and then I also ran analysis of data that AI had actually extracted, that being Claude, and actually realizing that more than 60% of data that had extracted I couldn't use because I was looking at sensory assessments compared to psychosis assessments, and the data that AI had extracted, and I said was over 60%. Some of it was comparing autism assessments with psychosis-like assessments, and that's not what I was looking at. But as you can see, there were still both insignificant results, and it's just by 0.1, but that there is a difference whenever using AI compared to you actually doing the research and putting the data yourself. So I had statistically insignificant results. Well, that was anticlimactic, but you know what? That's okay. All it means is that I need more data. It doesn't mean that my hypothesis is not true or that it can't be true. And speaking of collecting data, I am not deterred whatsoever because there's plenty out there that still needs to be collected, still needs to be analyzed, and there's already everything that's in biobanks right now. And I just wanted to bring up this really cool point of when I was going through my data collection, is that I actually found data from Kenya, and it was comparing autism and psychosis-like experiences, remember from those assessments from my methodology, and it was over 9,000 participants. And I was amazed by this, and it led me down this rabbit hole of discovering the neurodiversity movement in Kenya, in Nigeria, and other places of Africa. And I found the NeuroGap Psychosis, which is the Neuropsychiatric Genetics and African Population Biobank. And this is fascinating. So now for future directions. Now exactly where am I taking this project? So again, here's my hypothesis. Remember, sensory processing differences that are hiding autistic populations serve as one pathway to psychosis spectrum experiences. So how am I able then to collect more data? One is to be able to successfully get IRB, Independent Review Board approval, to be able to conduct surveys. The second one is just to make sure that I'm including global data, so from non-weird countries. Weird means westernized, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and also make sure that I am representing women as well. And have the voices of lived experience through qualitative data. I'm going to explain this in the next slide. And lastly, I do want to have genetics as a piece. As I talked about earlier, the challenges of accessing genetic data and analyzing it. And so I think the best thing to do is actually to collaborate with specialists, with geneticists in this field to be able to add on to my research. And again, obviously that's not the hypothesis, my current hypothesis. This could be a separate project, but I really want to be able to analyze that genetic piece of psychosis as well. In addition, this project is registered under the Open Science Framework, so you can learn more online. Now for my last future direction, which is the voices of lived experience. So I'm currently working on a project. It's called Red Room, Blue Room, and it's the idea of collecting stories of this duality with psychosis-like experiences or hallucinations. And I'm actually not going to launch this until the end of this year. I actually have a few more projects that I have to get through, but this is definitely a work in progress. If you're interested in learning more, please email me or you can contact me through LinkedIn on the last slide. Before I do, here's 2 quick pages of references. You're more than welcome to take a screenshot, and also you can contact me about any of this information. Here's my contact information. I have LinkedIn, email as well. Please reach out. I'm interested in collaboration. I'm interested in hearing people's personal experiences about this. That's what I mentioned in the other slide about the lived experience portion of that. And just wanted to say a big thank you again to the Neurodiversity Foundation. And my research partner, Frederique, is on right after me after my question and answer. So definitely stay tuned. And again, happy Science Day.